Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to this week's edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. Monday at 4:30, we always look back on the weekend of boxing action just gone, give it a bit of a review, and then get ready for the following week, which you can catch up with in ReFLEXpectations, which comes out on Thursday. This week there wasn't loads going on, but there was plenty of eventful action in the ring on the shows that did take place. One of which was obviously the bare knuckle fighting championships main event between Paulie Malignaggi and Lobov, which I'll talk about in brief towards the end, but it's not something that I took a great deal of interest in. It did some good numbers on our the video side of our channel, which is obviously what you're watching now, and hopefully it draws some more people from outside of boxing into the sport. It wasn't exactly the greatest representation of traditional boxing in its normal sense, but still attracted attention beyond the hardcore, so that can't be a bad thing all round. But first, let's go to the Matchroom Next Gen show, which took place at the home of Small Hall Boxing, without meaning to sound too patronising. It's a great place to watch live boxing. York Hall in London's Bethnal Green. Raucous atmosphere, also very, very hot in there. And we saw Conor Benn take the next step in his improving career, it's fair to say. He had virtually no amateur background, the son, of course, of legendary Nigel Benn. So he's still kind of learning on the job. Took a step up of sorts against Finland's Jussi Koivula. And seemed to be in a little bit of trouble in the first round. Not serious trouble, but was rocked, maybe buzzed. Took a few clean shots. And people were starting to worry, particularly the commentators, whose voices went a bit higher pitched when they saw Conor potentially hurt. In the second round, he came out with renewed focus, worked his way inside well, landed a left hook that really changed things, and got his man out of there in round two after some telling shots, it's fair to say. Not too worried about Conor Benn. I think the Josh Kelly fight, which I know has been talked about, I think it's a bit too early for him. Promoter Eddie Hearn said in the post-fight he doesn't think it will happen this year. I agree with that. Even though Kelly's coming off the first blemish on his record and Conor's still unbeaten, Kelly obviously drawing with Ray Robinson on that Joshua Ruiz undercard. I don't think Conor Benn's ready for him yet. I think Josh Kelly was obviously an Olympian, had a long distinguished amateur career, and has fought by far the better opposition thus far as a pro. I think there's definitely a level or two between them at the moment. But let Conor Benn just get on, continue to improve. This was his first official main event. He's got time on his side. He's still very young. Let's just give him the time and the space he needs to develop, and we'll see how he gets on. But I enjoy watching him. He's an exciting fighter to watch, and he's certainly getting better under Tony Sims. Also on the show, we saw his stablemate, Conor's stablemate, Ted Cheeseman, make the first defence of his British Super Welterweight title. And he laboured a bit, to be fair. I know he's out on holiday now with fiancée Jenna and their little baby, Ted Jr., which is lovely to see. After all the problems we've talked about Ted experiencing in the past, it's nice to see him taking some well-deserved time off. And he certainly gave value for money on Friday night. Him and 3 weeks' notice challenger, Kieran Conway, really got the crowd on their feet and gave us all a great 12-round fight. You know, Conor Benn was exciting for a couple of rounds, but Cheeseman and Conway sustained it for the entire championship distance. Conway was a bit of a revelation. He'd never made 154 pounds before. He'd lost in his biggest fight, the semi-final of Ultimate Boxer in May, I think it was, against the eventual winner, Derek Asazi. But he came out, he showed some lovely movements and great punch picking, especially with the uppercut. And really good hand speed as well. You know, I hadn't seen a lot of him before, I don't mind admitting that. But he turned out to be a really, really talented fighter on the night. Of course, being a really big guy, he looked a division bigger than Cheeseman, and someone who hadn't made the weight limit before, someone who hadn't been the championship distance before either. It was predictable that he would fade in the second half of the fight, which he did, allowing Cheeseman back into things. Cheeseman stuck to his task doggedly, but came forward too much in straight lines, a problem that's reared its ugly head a couple of times previously as well, not just in the European title defeat in February to Sergio Garcia, but previous to that as well. Certainly in some of his better wins, Cheeseman has always been combative, but he used his head movement and his footwork a lot more in the past. Seems to have gotten away from that to an extent, and I'm sure Tony Sims will be wanting to bring him back to it. But his tenacity and his harder shots certainly brought him back into things against Conway. To me, by the end, he seemed to have done enough by 1, maybe 2 rounds. But the judges had it a draw, which was kind of hard to argue with, although Cheeseman did predictably feel hard done by. But I'm not sure there'll be a rematch of that now. I think Cheeseman's next fight's got to be against the mandatory challenger, Scott Fitzgerald. And that's a really intriguing one, because if the same Cheeseman who fought Conway turns up, I think Fitzgerald beats him. However, if Cheeseman can get back to the sort of form that saw him beat people like Carson Jones, and some of the other British prospects on the way up. Even the Cheeseman that beat Senior Byfield for the British title, although that one started to show a few flaws, I think then it becomes more of a 50-50 fight. But he will need to go back to the drawing board on those elements that I've talked about. The other big fight, the other 12-round fight certainly on the show, was a final eliminator for the British light heavyweight title that saw Craig Richards outpoint someone who I would say was a bitter rival in the build-up, although they seem quite friendly now. South London rival, certainly, Andre Sterling. Sterling gave a really good account of himself, I thought. He was rough, tough, kept coming forward, targeting Richards' body. Richards was very upright. Started okay, but on the 6th round he dropped Sterling. Didn't get him out of there, but seemed to impose himself, and then dropped off a bit in the middle rounds after that. Let Sterling back into the fight, and then towards the end reimposed himself once again, scoring really well with the jab, moving a lot more, which is what he should have done at the start, I think, Richards. He was allowing himself to be caught in the pocket far too often. But jabbing a lot more, always looking for that big right hand. The thing with Richards is he had those knockout wins, I think 3 or 4 in a row early on, including the really impressive one against Jake Ball. And he's got caught into that trap that big punchers do in looking for that one big right hand all the time. And he's actually a really neat boxer, so if he gets back to that a bit more, it will stand him in good stead going forward. One of the issues we have now, though, is that he's just won an eliminator for the British light heavyweight title, but that's held by Joshua Buatsi, who's a good friend of Richards, and who said previously, Richards has, that if they're going to fight each other, it'd have to be at a higher level than the British title. So it's unlikely that's going to happen anytime soon, although Eddie Hearn did say he wanted to make it perhaps for October or November. I don't see it happening next. I don't think Richards or necessarily Buatsi want it just yet. So before I go, I did promise that I'd talk a little bit about Malignaggi Lobov. Bit embarrassing for Malignaggi that he's going out of the sport on a low, but I suppose previous to that he'd lost by stoppage to Sam Eggington, so you wouldn't want to go out on that either, considering Malignaggi's a former 2-weight world champion. He gave his best against Lobov. He seemed to be winning the fight until the 2nd round when he tells us he broke his right hand, throwing a 1-2 or landing a 1-2. After that, Lobov came back into it in what was quite a scrappy affair. Both men got cut. Malignaggi was doing well on his jab, but certainly threw a lot less punches, fewer punches, grammar police out there. Fewer punches once his hand went, and Lobov came back into the fight, eventually took over and won a close but unanimous decision over 5 2-minute rounds. As I said earlier, it's not a great spectacle for boxing, but on the flip side, if it's brought new fans in who are actually going to watch some real traditional boxing, like the type we saw at York Hall, then happy days. Now, I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear about Malignaggi Lobov, not so much the fight, but what you think of it all. Is it just an oddity, an outlier, or is it an indication of the sort of thing boxing needs to do going forward to sell itself better to the casual audience? Let us know. And also, if you watched the York Hall show like I did, what was the fight of the night and what was the performance of the night and why? Really great to hear from you. I'll be back next week, Monday, 4:30 PM for the next Reflections, or this Thursday, again 4:30 PM for ReFLEXions. Thanks very much. Always a pleasure.